Last time we looked at the criminal justice system, and I hope you've had a chance to read the lectures where you've learned more about the views and the characteristics of that system. And today we're going to look at a very important idea that we've dealt with for a long time. It seems like it's a pretty simple thing to do at face value, but it turns out it's a very difficult thing, and that is the measurement of crime. How much crime do we have in the United States of America? How much crime do we have in Fairbanks or New York City? These are very important questions. Two reasons that they're important come to mind. Number one, public policy. How can we make good public policy if we don't know what the extent of crime is? The second thing is research and evaluation. How do we know? What are some of the factors that may be correlated to crime? Is the economy important, for example? These are very basic types of questions and the need for answers that society has, all depending on our measurement of crime. Now, over the years, we've developed three ways of not only measuring crime, but also attempting to learn about crime. First, self-report studies. Second, victimization studies. And third, the FBI's Uniform Crime Report. And let's take a look at each one of these, because from each one of these, we can learn some very important things. First of all, self-report studies. What are self-report studies? This is simply a researcher going out to a group of people, typically by a questionnaire, and asking questions about their criminal behavior. Surveys are given quite frequently in educational systems, high schools, college classes. Sometimes we have particular focuses like change in drug habits, change in drug use that people have. That's the focus of self-report studies. And there's a major point about the results of self-report studies, and the point that we want to leave you with today is this. And one of the things that we conclude from self-report studies is that a substantial amount of us have committed behaviors that if we were to have been caught, we could have been arrested and perhaps even served time. Fortunately, most of us didn't get caught, and most of us do not get involved that deeply in the criminal justice system. But the point is that criminal behavior, in a certain way, is widespread across the population. Now, does that mean that we're all criminals? Well, to a criminologist, no. I like to use the term mess up versus criminality. If a person messes up, we typically do not continue to do that because of our conscience, because of our fear of getting punished perhaps. We don't continue our criminal behavior, as opposed to someone who adopts criminal behavior as a way of life. And that's who we really refer to when we refer to criminals. The second way that we've mentioned to look at the crime in our country is through victimization studies. Now, these studies actually began in 1966 when President Lyndon Baines Johnson turned his administration efforts onto looking at crime in our country. Various people thought that the crime was increasing. There was a general public concern about the level of crime in our country. And President Johnson created what is known as the Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice. And one of the recommendations that came from that commission was an attempt to measure crime through a national crime and victimization survey. And so in 1966, with the help of the Bureau of Census, over 10,000 households were contacted, and details on the crimes that these households had experienced, details on the victims of those crimes, and where the victims could remember, even characteristics on the offenders themselves, began to be recorded. And that was the first time that we really emphasized an effort to look at people who were victims of crime. After that, in 1972, we began an annual National Crime and Victimization Survey. And many questions that were looked at were maybe to many people sort of a petty level of crime. Like, did you have a bike stolen? Did you have a stereo stolen? We also looked at the occurrence of major crimes, serious crimes like assault and battery. Now, a major point that, again, comes out of these studies is this. There are many offenses that occur in our society which never come to the attention of the criminal justice system. And we will learn to call these offenses the dark figure of crime. The last method of studying the occurrence of crime is through the production of what is known as the Uniform Crime Report. The Uniform Crime Report is produced by the FBI and has been since the mid-1930s. It is a published a set of crime statistics. It comes out annually. And recently, all of this information is readily available to us on the web. And you may enjoy taking a look at not only the amount of crimes, but the other information which is contained in the UCR. Now, a couple of things about the UCR that we should note. First of all, participation in the UCR by police agencies across the country is totally voluntary. However, over 17,000 agencies contribute voluntarily the offenses that are known to them. This is very important. The only offenses that will wind up being reported in the Uniform Crime Report are offenses which are known to police. Now, typically, the police will know them through victims or through investigation. But the fact is, if a crime is not known to police, it does not appear in the Uniform Crime Report. Now, the Uniform Crime Report breaks crimes into two areas, or into two parts. The first part, referred to as Part 1, we'll also learn to call the index. The index crimes are chosen by the FBI, and this has been chosen many years ago, and I suppose we continue using these as the index because they can be used to compare year by year. And they are broken themselves, Part 1 is broken into two categories, violent crimes and property crimes. The violent crimes are murder, robbery, aggravated assault, and sexual assault. The property crimes are burglary, larceny theft, auto theft, and recently the FBI is suggesting that we may want to include arson as well. Why do we call it an index? Because it is used as the figure by which we have agreed, in part, to measure any changes in the crime of the nation. After all, that is what an index is, isn't it? It's a subset of a larger part of things that we want to use as an indicator of how everything else is going. Think of the index in the stock market, for example. We use a small number of stocks to indicate how the market at large is doing. It's the same idea with the crime index of Part 1. Now, Part 2 is composed of crimes that are arrest only. An important thing in Part 1 crimes, an arrest does not have to be made, just known to the law enforcement agency. Part 2 crimes, on the other hand, are only recorded if an actual arrest is made. Now, here we have many other crimes that are included. Drug violations, DWI, fraud, vandalism, vagrancy, prostitution. These are all the crimes that are of interest to society, of interest to the FBI, that are not included in Part 1. But what is interesting about this to me is that when we read or we hear in the public media about crime is on the increase or crime is on the decrease, well, actually, we're only talking about these 7 crimes. It could very well be that a community could have an increase in perhaps DWI drug violations while experiencing, according to the national measurement system, Part 1 index crimes, a decrease. So the important thing for us is to recognize this so that as we begin to hear reports and we read in our newspapers about the changes in crime, begin to realize what that index is based on. It's a very important index and it tells us an awful lot, but we can read much of these reports a lot more intelligently after we begin to understand the contents of the index itself. Now, a major point is that when we even look at the index crimes, we need to think about these crimes as having been known to police. I emphasized that point a moment ago, and I'd like to go back to it. If the system doesn't know about the occurrence of a crime, then there is no way we can include it in the official statistics. So why would the system not know if a crime has occurred? We realize now that there are factors that affect whether or not people will report. It's called the reporting phenomena. And criminologists have become interested in studying why would some people simply not report a crime. And we have identified factors like the following. Police-community relations. If the police are not in a good relationship with their community, then a person may be a little hesitant to contact the police and to let the police know about a crime that has occurred. We also know that the advent of social services in a community can affect how much crime is known about. If you have a women's shelter, for example, come into being where women who have been assaulted have a place to go and find safety, they may be more likely to report that than if they did not have those social services. So just the occurrence of a social service system in a community can affect what the official crime rate is, when in fact perhaps the actual number of crimes did not go up. A third factor that can affect the number of known crimes has to do with the police agencies themselves, who record the number of crimes that come in. There's a famous case that occurred a number of years ago about a man who became the new chief of police in a major city in America, and he reorganized the department. And one of the things he did was to make the section of his police department that deals with producing the Uniform Crime Report statistics for the FBI. He added people, he reorganized them, he trained them so that they did a much better job. Now let me ask you this, what do you think happened to the city's crime rate? Well, indeed, it went up. And the mayor, as I remember, had quite a bit of explanation to explain to the public that the city was indeed not in the midst of an increase in crime. We even, unfortunately, over the years have read in our newspapers about some major cities which were suspected of maybe manipulating the UCR statistics. After all, a city might be interested in reducing the crime. Surprisingly, some cities are interested in increasing the crime because of the potential of additional federal resources. So let's take a quick look inside of the UCR, and we're going to be looking now at a table. This came right off the web. There are many tables compiling the crime in various ways, but I wanted to introduce you to what a page of the UCR would look like. This is table one we're looking at, crime in the United States by volume and rate. And we see that the FBI has given us a historical progression here, beginning in 1993 all the way up to 2012. And it turns out, you go to your library, you can even find the UCRs prior to 1993 if you have an interest in it. But let's look at the table for 2012. And one of the things that we see is that the number of violent crimes is all added together in a column that we're looking at here. And we see in 2012 that the system knew about approximately 1.2 million of violent crimes. Knew about 8.9 million of property crimes. Not surprising, and it's a good thing. We'd rather have more property crimes than violent crimes if we've got to have crimes at all. And we find also information such as there was over 14,800 murders in the country in 2012, 354,000 or more robberies. Larceny theft comprised the largest category of about 6.1 million. So this is an example of the kinds of information which the UCR presents to us. And even so, as we look at these numbers, and one of the tasks that we provide you in this section is to compare your city's crime rates to another city, and I suggest New York City would be good. And so we can compare Fairbanks, Alaska, and ask the questions, well, how does our violent crime rate compare to New York City? Well, I'll leave you with this question. What do you think? If you live in your town, in your city, wherever you are, how do you think you would compare to New York City? And you will develop the ability through the exercise that we give you later on to go into the UCR and using those to answer that question, how you compare. But again, I emphasize, also ask questions like, if your city comes out perhaps higher than another place like New York City on violent crimes, ask yourself, is it perhaps because we have a good relationship with our police? We have good social services, and so it's more or less likely that these crimes will become known to the system and recording. So this is an introduction to the methods by which our country uses to measure and to learn about crime. And we have a great deal of information that is available to us. And I encourage you to read the lectures to learn some of the findings in detail that these methods have yielded, and also to take the opportunity to go on the internet and to find even additional studies and additional material about how in the United States of America we measure crime.